Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're setting off on a truly global expedition into the deep, uncharted parts of our planet. And look, we're not talking about the edges of the wild here, or those well-trodden tourist trails you might have hiked on your last vacation. No, we are venturing into the deep interior, the places where literally no road has ever been built, where no researcher has ever pitched a tent, and absolutely no camera has ever recorded what actually walks beneath the canopy after dark. So get ready, because what we're looking at today, it challenges pretty much everything we think we know about the mapped world.
124. Just let that number sink in for a second. Back in 2013, a team of scientists ventured into a remote, completely unsurveyed section of the Bolivian Amazon, and in just 3 weeks, they didn't just stumble across one or two new bugs. They documented 124 species entirely new to science. 124 in 3 weeks, in just one single jungle. And this is on a planet we so confidently assume we've already, thoroughly mapped out.
Which brings us to a frankly staggering reality. Scientists estimate that an absolutely massive 80% of land species on Earth have not yet been formally documented. 80%! We only know about a tiny 20% slice of the pie. The sheer scale of the unknown is just breathtaking. And most of that undocumented 80%, well, they're hiding out in jungles exactly like the ones we're going to explore today.
Section 1. The Unseen 80%.
So we are going deep into that untouched interior. Now, some of the creatures living in these uncharted spaces, they've only been seen once. Some have only been heard. And some exist primarily in the serious historical accounts of indigenous communities who have lived right alongside them for thousands of years, all while the rest of the world just kind of refused to believe them. We're going to explore 5 specific creatures across 5 different jungles. And let me be clear, these aren't just campfire stories. These are anchored in serious indigenous accounts and, crucially, hard physical evidence. They are real enough to keep actual credentialed scientists awake at night.
Section 2. Jungle Primates and Giants.
Okay, let's dive into this. For our first geographic leap, we're heading to the incredibly dense and highly biodiverse island of Sumatra. Local communities across Sumatra have been reporting this specific creature for centuries, the orang pendek, which literally translates to short person. And notice the consistency here. It's described as roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, covered in short gray or brown hair, and exceptionally fast. But the really important detail, the word bipedal. Across dozens of independent accounts spanning multiple generations and regions, it is consistently described as walking upright on 2 legs, just like a human, not on all 4s like your typical ape.
And we aren't just relying on a single eyewitness here. We've got hard physical evidence. Trained field researchers, including the British wildlife photographer Debbie Martyr, who actually spent years over in Sumatra, have reported direct sightings. Casts of footprints have been actively collected and scientifically analyzed. People have meticulously gathered hair samples from the jungle and submitted them for modern DNA testing. And those DNA results, they yielded a totally fascinating conclusion. Quote, "Some results came back as unknown primate. Not inconclusive, unknown." Now that is a massive distinction. This isn't just some lab error or a contaminated sample, right? The DNA presents a legitimate, verifiable scientific mystery. It literally belongs to a primate that science just doesn't have on file yet. To really see how plausible this is, think about it like this. Sumatra is already home to orangutans, tigers, rhinos, all sharing the exact same jungle. But in 2017, a completely new species of orangutan, the Tapanuli orangutan, was officially discovered hiding out in northern Sumatra. Guys, that was the first new great ape discovered in nearly a century. So, if a completely new, massive great ape was successfully hiding in this exact jungle all the way until 2017, it absolutely anchors the idea that the orang pendek could easily be right there with it.
All right, let's shift our expedition over to the Amazon, 2.7 million square miles of dense rainforests. And somewhere inside it, according to communities across Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, is our second creature, the mapinguari. It's described as this massive, heavily built beast, 7 feet tall, covered in reddish fur, with these terrifying claws that can literally tear trees apart. But its most famous trait by far, it's this unbearable, overwhelming smell, like rotting flesh, that actually warns you it's coming long before you ever lay eyes on it.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why scientists eventually stopped dismissing this creature. If you compare the indigenous descriptions of the mapinguari directly against the paleontological facts of the megatherium, the giant ground sloth, it's uncanny. Massive height? Check. Tree-tearing claws? Check. And that crazy rotting flesh smell?
Well, ground sloths actually possessed specialized skin glands used for chemical communication, and they would have smelled exactly like that. The descriptions are basically identical.
Now, the usual counter-argument is that giant ground sloths went extinct 10,000 years ago. Case closed, right? But wait a minute. In geological terms, 10,000 years is practically yesterday. Extinction dates are often based on super incomplete fossil records. Plus, the deep Amazon interior has river systems that are entirely unsurveyed. When you look at it that way, the biological overlap between the Mapinguari and a surviving giant ground sloth is simply impossible to ignore.
Section 3. The Undocumented Predators.
Next, we're shifting our expedition over to the rugged, heavily forested terrains of Mexico's Sierra Madre and the deep jungles of East Africa. In these regions, undocumented apex predators are basically slipping right through the cracks of modern science. Down in Mexico, we have the onza, which has been documented since the 1500s. Unlike your typical stocky puma, the onza is distinctly slender, has longer legs, and is known to be highly aggressive. Meanwhile, over in Tanzania, we have the mwagwa. And listen, it's not a lion and it's not a leopard. It's described as being the size of a donkey, with gray brindled fur. It hunts exclusively at night and leaves behind tracks that do not match a single known feline on the African continent.
And once again, we've got the hard evidence to back this up. Back in 1986, a Mexican rancher actually shot an onza. Biologists examined the carcass, and guess what? Its skull morphology and limb proportions didn't match any known cat, and it yielded some incredibly strange DNA. As for the mingua, British colonial administrators in the 1920s documented real official administrative records of fatal attacks. We even have expert trackers like Patrick Bowen going on the record to confirm that the footprints they followed matched absolutely no known cat species on Earth. So if you're sitting there thinking, come on, a large mammal can't just hide, consider this. The clouded leopard of Borneo wasn't officially confirmed as a separate species until 2006, and the okapi, a large relative of the giraffe in Africa, that was considered a literal myth by Western science all the way until 1901. Our recurring refrain in this explainer is simple. Large, highly significant animals routinely evade modern science for centuries.
Section 4. The Coastal Leviathan.
Now we're transitioning from the deep jungle to the coastal waters of Southeast Asia to meet what is easily the most bizarre and honestly most quickly dismissed creature on our list, the con ret. The name translates to millipede in Vietnamese. It's described as a 60-foot, multi-segmented, heavily armored creature moving through jungle waterways and open coastal waters. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. A 60-foot giant millipede-like creature? That sounds like pure myth. It sounds completely dismissible. That is, until you look at the actual historical documentation, which absolutely demands our attention.
Let's just trace the historical timeline here for a second. First, we know from fossil records that ancient relatives of arthropods reached huge sizes. We're talking the 8-foot Arthropleura in swamps and the 8-foot Jachyloplurus in the oceans. Those are confirmed facts. Then, fast forward to 1883. A 60-foot segmented armored carcass actually washes up in Along Bay, Vietnam, and it is physically examined by multiple witnesses before decomposing. Then, 16 years later, in 1899, a French marine biologist officially reports a second, nearly identical carcass. Guys, that is not nothing. That is a major biological question that was just never properly answered. Section 5. What the jungle keeps. All right, it's time to pull all 5 of these geographical threads together and reinforce our central, scientifically grounded narrative. Because we aren't talking about ghosts or magic here, we are talking about biology. Think about what we've covered. We have unknown primate DNA from Sumatra, exact physical parallels to ground sloths in the Amazon, unidentified predator skulls sitting in Mexico, armored coastal carcasses washing ashore in Vietnam, and official colonial administrative records of fatal attacks in Tanzania. This is hard, physical, and historical evidence across all 5 of these creatures.
So the crucial point really comes down to this. Dismissing them entirely takes more faith than investigating them. You see, the jungle does not announce what it's keeping. It never has. It just waits in the dark, under the canopy, for someone to come looking seriously enough. And frankly, we just haven't looked seriously enough yet.
I want to leave you with one final reminder today. Remember the Tapanuli orangutan, a massive, incredibly loud great ape. It managed to stay perfectly hidden from the entirety of modern science, just living its life in Sumatra all the way until 2017. If that can happen right here in the 21st century,
It leaves us with this one undeniably fascinating question.
what else is still in there? Just think about that remaining 80% of undocumented life hiding out right now in the deep interior. Thank you so much for joining me for this explanation. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.